Hello, friends. I'm Michael Levine, and I am proud to tell you this is the 10th anniversary of this uh, unusual broadcast called Without Notes, a show probably best defined by its title. It's just a conversation, it's not an interview. Today, our guest is world renowned rock concert promoter John Scher. John Scher is one of the preeminent rock promoters of all time, played a pivotal role in so many artists' development, but probably most famously known for working with the Grateful Dead. John Scher will be my partner for the expedition, friends. We're going to have an interesting, I think, conversation about an improbable life. John Scher, one of the country's most prominent, most almost legendary concert promoters, a man I've known of for many, many years, who invented, in many ways, the contemporary uh, concert scene. And so it's a real honor to have you here, John. John, thank you for joining us on Without Notes.
Nice to be here. We're old friends.
We are indeed. Okay, so let's start with some background. Where were you born?
Newark, New Jersey.
Newark, New Jersey, which I, of course, know where that is. And all right, raised in Newark, or
Just the first couple of years of my life, then my parents moved to the suburbs to West Orange, New Jersey.
right? Okay, and that's where you went to high school.
Yes.
Were you a good student, John?
No, I was a terrible student.
And now, with the advantage of hindsight, were you a terrible student because you just didn't want to apply yourself, or were there some underlying disabilities, or why do you think you're so bright? Why do you think you were a terrible student?
Oh, I know. I have every learning disability that they've ever discovered. But in the 60s,
No, no,
it didn't exist.
didn't
So
exist.
so everybody,
Dyslexia was called dumb.
yes, yes. And so everybody from, teachers to administrators to really my parents, just thought I wasn't applying myself.
Right,
Uh,
of course.
and, and
Yeah,
yes. So, as I got older and when I eventually went to college, I sort of discovered, dyslexia and ADD and those things, and I sort of overcame them. I still suffer from it,
you have to
but
work
I've
around it.
learned to overcome it.
Yeah, you find workarounds. John,
Yes.
I don't understand something. If you say to me that you had every learning disability known to man and it wasn't known at the time, you're a very poor student, as was I. How the hell did you get into college, son?
Well, I guess at the end of the day, um, my grades were sort of average.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the things that I was really interested in, history, um, some kinds of English classes and stuff, I excelled. So along all the C's and D's, there were a couple of A's and B's. Um, and
Balance.
so, you know, and I applied to and got into Long Island University, which was, sort of average school, a little better now. And I first they had a campus out in Southampton, so I first went out there because I thought I was a basketball player, and it'd be easier to make the team on that level. But I was awakened to the fact that I was too short, I was too slow. I stayed on the team for maybe a month, I realized that I was going to be a 12th man on a 13-man squad, and I wasn't going to really play, and I loved to play. Um, so I transferred back to the main campus, which was in Brooklyn, which really was a fabulous change of life for me. Living and going to school in downtown Brooklyn, um, yeah, opened up a whole new world to me.
And John, were you athletic at the time, in high school and college?
Yeah, a little above average. I thought I was better, but
Yeah,
a
I
little
understand.
above average.
That's a common note. Now, if I had met you in high school, met you or your family, would you have appeared to my eye to have been a middle class, from a middle class home, lower middle class, upper middle class? How would you have appeared to my eye?
Lower middle class.
You were from a lower middle class home, many disabilities, a very different America, very different world, parents not attending to every need of a child. I joke a lot, John. I see parents today spend more time with their kids in a week than my parents spent with me in a year. It's just a very different world. Okay, so you go to college,
I'm sorry to interrupt. My parents were pretty attentive.
right?
My mom sort of never gave up on me. My dad, not understanding, well, nobody understanding the learning disabilities.
Nobody
Um,
understood.
but no, my mom stuck with me, and uh, it was okay. It was a pretty loving
Brothers
family.
and sisters
One brother, one older brother.
with a younger brother. Okay, so the journey now is in college, and you're not going to make the basketball team. And at this point in the story, John, had I met you and I said, John, what do you want to do? What's the goal? Would you have had a set goal or not especially?
Oh no, by the time you met me, which was early into my career,
Mhm.
I was starting to promote concerts.
Yes.
And that story's a long story, but I'll try to give you the short version. I was A friend of mine was the president, a year older than me, now a world famous oncologist, was the president of the high school student council, and he appointed me the junior prom chairman. And we all decided that we were going to have the best junior prom ever, and we were going to do something different other than just having a wedding bar mitzvah band there. So we figured out a couple of ways to raise some money, and we bought the chiffons to come perform at our prom. They had a couple of hits, and so the prom quickly sold out, and uh, there we were with my tux on, and they didn't show up.
Oh, oh,
Ye- Years later,
a big
I
problem.
yeah, well, we had a band, you know, but it took years later to find out what happened to them. They were on their way to our prom, stopped at a bar someplace, got in a vicious fight with each other, and that was it. They they didn't follow up and come to the show. Um, but I was fascinated at the time with the process of booking it. All right. And I was very much a child of the Fillmore East.
Now,
In
John, let's explain to the audience. You and I both know and attended the Fillmore East, but
right,
I want people who are watching this all over the world, many who were not born when the Fillmore East existed,
right.
explain to them from your perspective both what it was and its social significance, and then also identify who in the God's name is Bill Graham.
Right. Okay. Um, Fillmore East was a a theater on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I don't know exactly, but probably somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000. Bill
3,000.
Graham, Bill Graham owned it and promoted there. And it was truly, at least on the East Coast, the sort of high holy cathedral of
Yep.
contemporary music.
Correct.
There were no, in those days, and we're talking about very late 60s, early 70s, um, acts didn't play arenas. The pinnacle of their career would be playing the Fillmore East and probably
Four
the Fifth.
shows, an early show on Friday, a late show on Friday night, an early show on Saturday, and a late show on Friday night. Four
Exactly.
performances. Right.
In 2 days. Yes, exactly. And the atmosphere was sort of the first time. So I'm in high school when I first go there.
Right.
First time I sort of felt that the adults weren't in charge.
Right.
And it was sort of a good feeling. There wasn't chaos. It just, you looked around, there were no grown-ups there. And there was a very famous light show that was said by an old friend of mine now, Joshua White, and called the Joshua Light Show. And that's, if you look back at that era, he invented sort of the blobs and all the things behind the band that were psychedelic at the time. So whether you were, taking drugs or not, that atmosphere uh, was front and center. Um, so I went, in high school, I probably went a half a dozen times, but then I find myself in downtown Brooklyn and being 18 years old or maybe 19. One subway stop from the Fillmore East, two subway stops from the West Village. And So it was easy to go. The tickets were literally a couple of bucks, $3, $4, $5. It was a raging great scene in the West Village, lots of clubs. Um, and so all of a sudden I'm at LIU and there's posters all over the campus saying, come join the concert committee. So I said, sure, I'd like to do that. And I went to the first meeting and the student president said, look, we got X amount of dollars from the camp, from the university. We can put on a concert. And at the time, part of the LIU campus, it still is, was the old Brooklyn Paramount Theater, very famous from the 50s of shows that went on. But LIU had converted it into a gym. So the stage and the lower orchestra were a basketball court, but the rest of it was, the old, great, beautiful theater. So we had a place to put it. And I don't know, 50, 60 kids came to this meeting. And finally, they said, okay, we've got the money, we've got the place. Who knows how to book a show? And I looked and I looked around. No one raised their hand. I did. I had booked the chiffons.
That's right. Who didn't show up?
Right.
Right.
Um, so I booked Tim Harden, Jerry Jeff Walker, and Melanie. And if you go back in history,
Melanie was a big star at the time.
yes, well, this was just coming off of Woodstock. This was
Right.
just coming off of Woodstock, which is where she
Yeah.
blew out. So
Now, Melanie is not well known today and recently died, but she was a big star at the time.
yes, for probably throughout the 70s.
Yes.
Couple of hits,
Yep.
maybe more than a couple, but a couple of hits. Um, Jerry Jeff Walker was coming off of his one hit.
Yep.
Um, and Tim Harden, even then, although he was young, was sort of a legendary folk singer.
Right.
Uh,
So you
and
had this show at the theater at the in Brooklyn, and did it do well?
Did very well. Did very well. The tickets were probably $3, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
That traces back to a whole different conversation about $3 in
Ticket prices. But
1969.
then I want to understand how did that one evening success propel you forward?
Well, basically I said to myself, I can do this. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Imagine. Now, one thing I do want to note because I want to chime in to something John said. Ladies and gentlemen, John was clear about what the Fillmore East was. But the social significance of the Fillmore East in the early part of the middle 60s, early 70s is just impossible to magnify. It was so important, so big. It would be like Vatican City. It was the place. And Bill Graham was the first and very colorful concert promoter who became almost a counterculture national icon. And is that all your memory, John?
no, no, absolutely. Look, when I first, in those early days, he was my hero. You know,
Yeah. He
meeting,
was every young person's hero.
yeah, as I was booking these college shows and stuff, so I got friendly with agents. All right, I got introduced to Graham, which was,
Oh my God.
amazing at
Yeah.
the time. Now to go fast forward, my relationship with him ended up over the years very much as a roller coaster. All
And
right.
John, let me understand this. The Fillmore closes in June or July of
Mm.
71. You
Right.
open up this small but ultimately very important theater called the Capitol Theater in Passaic in December of 71. Do you buy the theater, John?
Years later, I did. At first, we rented
At
it from,
first, you rented it.
we rented it,
It was a
and
closed theater. It was an
no, no,
operating theater.
no. It was a big 3,500 capacity, old fashioned, vaudeville house that was showing porn movies. Um, and I had it for a short time. I had a partner, a guy named Al Hayward, who, was a good guy, interesting guy. And we found this theater, and because, the income of, now remember, this was a time when there was no porn on TV. There was, you went to the theater to see it. So, these people were very happy to rent it to us for a day at a time.
You happen
Um,
to remember the rent, John?
no, no.
Okay. So you
Sure.
rented it at a day at a time. Who was the first concert act that you put in the Passaic Capitol Theater?
Richie Havens.
Richie Havens, who had also performed at Woodstock and
Yeah.
was a big star at that time, a
Yeah. Had a
folk
couple big hits.
big hits, right? Okay. So Richie Havens performed in Passaic at the Capitol Theater. Did the show do well?
Yes. The,
Good.
the, the first full year of the Capitol, from that December till June, every
Right.
single show either sold out or came very close to it. So my hunch that there was a separate market in northern New Jersey instantly became a fact. All right. And so,
Because all of the previous to that, all of the people of northern New Jersey would go to Manhattan to the Fillmore, and
right.
now you are providing them an opportunity to have exactly what they were seeing at the Fillmore in their own area, their own.
Yes. And look, Jersey to this day is terribly misunderstood. It's really probably the fourth or fifth biggest market, all right, in the country. But no major city. In the day, Newark was a major city. I think at one
Course.
point the 16th largest in the country. But after the 67 riots, Newark went off the map. But there was still 6 million people in what was the old 201 area code, northern New Jersey. That made it a big market. Until the day it closed, I'd say 90, maybe 95% of the shows over a long period of time were profitable.
You ultimately bought the Capitol Theater in Passaic. What year did it ultimately close?
89.
1989. You kept that thing going from 1971 to 1989.
Yes.
Why did you close it, John?
Well, I'm sorry, I did.
Mhm.
Um, by that time, the arena business was in full-fledged. Um,
Which you
and
were in.
yeah, well, I was in, but the acts, uh, the acts, all instead of trying to play the Fillmore or the Capitol, they all wanted to be arena acts.
They all wanted to play Madison Square Garden.
Or in those days, the Meadowlands Arena. In the late 80s, going into the 90s, there wasn't very many acts to book.
Mhm.
They all
Mhm.
wanted to play the arenas.
Got
All
it.
right.
So you
And
couldn't get the
right,
supply chain, right?
right. And
And why
listen,
do you regret closing it?
because it turned around. All right.
Mhm.
Now it's a very
Because that was
healthy,
temporary.
yes. And but it probably lasted 10 years. But
Yeah.
today, there are a lot of acts that play theaters, 2,500 seat, 3,500 seats, and it's gone. It's been knocked down and
And I want to emphasize John's modesty is worth noting in that every single major rock and roll act of the 70s and 80s played the Capitol Theater in Passaic.
well, there are a lot of acts that had become arena acts, but still came back and played the Capitol.
I mean, you had a central, is it true that you had a central role initially in launching Bruce Springsteen?
Well, yes, early on. That's a story for another time. But yes, but Springsteen played there a number of times. The Rolling Stones came and played there. The Who came and played there. Genesis, Billy Joel, um, almost not all the big acts, but many, many, many very big acts either played it on their way up, all right, or in the case of the Stones and the Who, sort of paid homage to it.
Why didn't anyone, John, buy the Fillmore East from Bill Graham and start a new Fillmore East?
Graham wouldn't sell it. Graham wouldn't sell it. You see, what you have to understand,
So he bought the Fillmore East, he closed it, and then what did he do with it?
it eventually got sold.
Right,
He wouldn't let anybody promote it, concerts in it, because I
right,
tried.
right.
Um,
I hope
sort of
so.
it was his legacy, you know.
Right.
And excuse me, I think he probably regretted closing the Fillmore within days of having closed it, right? Because it was very smart guy most of the time, not all the time, and he closed it for a
Talk,
stupid reason.
you talked about your relationship being very up and down with Bill Graham. Talk about that for a moment. What was the
Well,
complexity of that relationship?
a couple of things. First, soon after Bill closed the Fillmore and said he's just going back to San Francisco and not going to do anything in the back east. He regretted it, and he started to sort of in a almost clandestine way try to book some arena shows in metropolitan New York, and he wasn't successful. He might have gotten a couple, but I was getting a lot of them. There was a promoter named Howard Stein who was getting a lot of them. Howard Stein opened up um, the Academy of Music on 14th Street, which
Which was
never,
another effort to try to be a Fillmore East type of
right,
environment.
right, correct. Um,
What went wrong, or why didn't the Academy of Music become a Fillmore East replacement? or did it?
Well, it sort of did for a while, but Howard Stern's ego completely got in the way. And the best way I can illustrate that is I became very close with probably the most important person in the history of the modern concert business, a guy named Frank Barcelona,
Who
who
was an agent?
was an agent, owned Premier Talent, overwhelmingly the most important agency. Um, and Frank tells me this story that Frampton, that's when Frampton Comes Alive was, breaking out in whatever year that
Peter
was.
Frampton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was playing, I don't remember exactly, but 4 or 5 nights at the Academy of Music. And Frank went to the show. And as he was driving down 14th Street, the Academy of Music had this huge marquee, old-fashioned, huge marquee. Really cool. I love those old marquees. Um, and when he turned the corner on the 14th, he saw the marquee which said, Howard Stein, real big, presents Peter Frampton, half the size of Howard Stein's name.
Wow.
and
Oh, holy.
and at that point, Frank, who was very responsible for Howard's success, said, this guy's out of control.
So you went on to much bigger things than the Capitol Theater in Passaic and were extraordinarily responsible for much of the success of the Grateful Dead. Talk about your relationship with the Grateful Dead for a minute as we get ready to close up.
Well, and that was the linchpin of the bad part of my relationship with Bill Graham.
Right.
Um, I booked a Grateful Dead show. There was an old AAA baseball park in Jersey City, New Jersey, um, where I can't remember whether it was the New York Giants or the Brooklyn Dodgers played their minor league team, their AAA team, and long had been abandoned. Both the Giants and the Dodgers had moved to the West Coast. But it was a big old 35,000 capacity stadium, and we knew about it. We went to Jersey City. We made a deal to do shows there, and for about 4 or 5 years, we did a lot of huge shows. Um, so I booked a Grateful Dead show. From the one time they had an agent, a guy named Ron Rainey. I booked the show, and it was wildly successful, blew out, sold out. Um, and over the next couple of years, I promoted a number of dates and became friendly with the Dead and their merry-go-round of management. Um, and came a time when I got a phone call at home from the road manager who called me and said, Jerry and Robert Hunter got busted on the New Jersey Turnpike. I need you to go bail them out. What do they need? I can't remember exactly, but it was probably $1,000. All right, maybe 2,000. So I said, okay. I knew that we kept some cash at the Capitol. And I said, where is it? They told me. I I got my car and went to the Capitol. I got the cash, headed down. Turns out that they got busted in South Jersey, probably a half an hour away from Philadelphia, 2.5 hours away from where I lived. But the road manager wasn't smart enough to call the Philadelphia promoter at the time. He just heard Jersey and thought of me. So I and a friend drove down, bailed Jerry and Robert out. And it was for, a small amount of pot. So you think about the difference between those days
Yeah.
and now. Then they played in at least one other, maybe two other tours. But the last tour in that period of their career that they played was a tour that they built what was a wall of sound. All right. And basically what it was, they were always perfectionists about their sound, about their lights, about they always cared first about the fans and what they gave them. So they spent a huge amount of money, probably in today's terms, millions of dollars, to build a sound system that was a huge wall behind them on stage. All right. So they could all mix the show themselves on stage. All right. It was behind them. And um, it just didn't work. All right. It, it blew their heads off. All right. The audience didn't complain, but it was so loud in front of them, I mean, behind them, that it was a complete failure. So they decided to take about a year off. And one day I get a phone call from Jerry, and the guy was his manager at the time, just Jerry's manager, not the Dead's manager, named Richard Loren, good guy, and said, I've been working on a movie. Um, why don't you fly out here and let me know what you think? So he was in LA at the time. That's where he was doing the movie. And I flew out and he picked me up. And first time I ever saw a 2002 BMW. All right. That was the expensive hippie car of the days, exceeded the Volkswagen. Uh, and we went to the editing facility, and I sat for whatever it was, I guess close to 2 hours, and watched the Grateful Dead movie, which was amazing. And to this day, it's amazing. All right. Animation that had never been used in that context before. Uh, Live footage from the final shows that they did on that previous tour, and it was great. And movie's over, and Jerry said, "Well, what'd you think, John?" I said, "I think it's great. I watched it on an editing bay, but I think it's great." He said, "Okay, let's go to dinner." After dinner, we sat down in the living room, and I looked at Jerry and said, "Really, Jerry, why'd you want me to see him?" So he looked me straight in the eye and said, "Because you're going to distribute it." I said, "Excuse me?"
I
And
beg your pardon?
you're going to distribute the movie. I said, "Jerry, the only thing I know about movies is I go to them pretty often." He said, "No, but you know more about the Grateful Dead than anybody alive." And indeed, they hired us. We did a lot of quick research. We figured out pretty quickly, what the sort of 20 biggest Grateful Dead markets were. And people on my staff and we found at the time, the biggest movie theaters in each major market, and we four-walled them. In other words, we rented them for 2 weeks.
Rented, yeah.
Yes. And we brought in sound systems because in those days, movie sound systems were one big speaker behind the screen. Right. Um, and uh, it was very successful. Um, I then made a secondary deal with a distributor to bring it to other markets and stuff. And, and that was it. A little bit more time goes by. Get a phone call again from Jerry. Said, "We're having a band meeting. We'd like you to come out." I said, "Sure." Figuring, we talk about East Coast states, all right, or whatever. I didn't really know because at that point they were still sort of retired. So I flew out to San Francisco. We met at Bob Weir's house, which is an amazing bachelor pad on the top of one of the mountains in Marin. Um, and the whole band was there. And we all sat around. I ended up sitting on the floor. And they said, look, uh, we want to go back on the road, but the Wall of Sound was a disaster, and we don't really see a way to play arenas that the sound can be good. So what do you suggest? So I said, let's play multiple days at theaters. In those days, very few acts played multiple days,
Right.
right? You know, one in, one out.
Right.
And they said, that's a great idea. And they said, how are you going to sell the tickets? They hated Ticketmaster from day one. It was really Ticketron at the time, I think.
Right.
Uh,
Ticketron.
and they recognized that their draw was bigger than, even if we played 3 days in a theater and sold, say, 10,000 tickets, their draw was much bigger than that.
Right.
So we devised a lottery,
Lottery. Yep.
and we ran a lottery out of my little office in New Jersey. And oh, we also created deadhead hotlines, one in their offices in San Francisco, in Marin, and one in my office. All right, so people could call and to get information and about shows and other things. So we got, I don't remember exactly, but it's probably about 10 cities. Got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of envelopes requests. All right. Many of whom had extraordinarily great artwork on the envelopes. Because
Okay.
and that's how that's the not the beginning, but that helped me understand how important a band was to their fans.
Right.
And I maintain to this day, other than the Beatles, they're the most important sociological band of the rock era, unquestionably. All right. And it's sort of proven now by the various different things that go out. Dead and Company go out and other things like that. They do huge business. The kids going to these shows never saw the Grateful Dead. Jerry had been dead for 20 years. Um, but anyway, we did the tour. It was flawless. They enjoyed it because, let's face it, if you're a musician, you got to enjoy playing a theater more than an arena or a stadium.
Sure.
But what it became very clear was that, they needed to move ahead into the modern era and they had to play arenas. So at that point, there was no agent. They asked me to book and promote all the shows, except for the California shows, which they still gave Bill Graham. At that point, from Bill's point of view, it was war. This was his band. How dare some guy from Jersey, be doing this? And he did everything for the rest of his life to fuck with me. All right. As a matter of fact, I'll close the Graham chapter at the moment by on the day that Bill died. All right. And I still think he was a brilliant, creative guy, but he spent many, many years fucking with me. On the day he died, that afternoon, I got a phone call from a guy named Tom Hewlett, who was the manager at the time of the Moody Blues. And they just confirmed a day or two before that a Moody Blues show for me in Manhattan at what was then the Felt Forum. So Tom calls me and he's laughing hysterically. I can't understand what he's saying. All right. And finally I said, Tom, stop. You called me. He said, I've just spent the last half hour getting screamed at by Bill Graham. I said, well, that's no big surprise. What is he screaming at you? He didn't want you to have the show in New York. He didn't want to promote it himself, but he wanted Ron Delsner to get the show. I said, well, I don't know what to say. And he started laughing again. He said, "Can you imagine the nerve of this guy? Calling me." And they played for him in, the markets that he was in, Sacramento, I guess, places like that. And of course, I kept the show, did well. But that night, the night after this conversation with Tom Hewlett, Bill died in a helicopter crash. And I wish he was still alive today.
Well, John, this is a fabulous and fascinating conversation about a life that began. Talk about an improbable life, right? Talk about an improbable life. And what's interesting, maybe for people watching this, is that there are a lot of young people watching this who may not know where they're headed. And in seeing you and in your success in an improbable life may gather some hope. So I thank you very much for your vulnerability and authenticity today, but more importantly, thank you for being this great figure in the lives of so many people who have enjoyed music in a way that maybe is hard to understand today. There isn't quite the same relationship between artists and fans today in many ways that there was back in the Fillmore and the Capitol Theater in Passaic. So thank you, John. I appreciate you very much.
Thanks. It was fun.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found that half as interesting as I did. What an improbable life. I also, as some of you know, have suffered from dyslexia at a time in which it was basically known as dumb. 40 years ago, dyslexia had a different name. It was called dumb. John Scher, An Improbable Life. I thank you for joining us on this interesting journey, this expedition with John Scher, one of the world's most acclaimed of all time rock promoters, concert rock promoters. And I hope you found his story half as interesting as I did. We'll be back with the next episode of Without Notes next month. Thank you again for tuning in.